Hello, and first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the New York League of Conservation Voters, Cure 100, Mothers Out Front, Bedford 2030, Sierra Club, Sustainable Hudson, and Renewable Hudson Valley for inviting me to participate in this wonderful event to let you guys know about more about what's going on with electric school buses in New York City, New York State, and the US as a whole. And I hope this encourages you to participate and take action in your local communities and make the world a little bit better for everyone. So how did I become an advocate for electric school buses? Well, I've been at the time that I started on this journey, it was about 5 years ago. And I've been an environmental attorney at that time for about 15 years. So I knew a lot about pollution. I deal a lot with hazardous waste, different chemicals in the environment, and also I've had a big passion from young about cars. Unfortunately, transportation sector is about 30% of the CO2 emissions and general air pollution that we face. And it's definitely a large sector that has to be curbed. And recently it's been going electric, and I've been a follower of Tesla for about from their very beginning, and seeing what's going on with passenger vehicles in the electric space. So I knew electrification of vehicles was a thing, but what got me hooked on school buses in particularly, I went to an event with my daughter. It was a play, and before that, our kids didn't ride the school bus. They walked to school in elementary school. And even I think at our school, there was probably 3 school buses that serviced our school. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with school buses firsthand. And for something that's so large and yellow and easy to see, I think for most people, we ignore school buses since we don't interact with them on a day-to-day basis. And actually that bus that you just saw was one outside of my daughter's school, and I recorded it, and they said that that bus was idling because it was actually charging a battery, because that was a hybrid bus. But anyway, we went to this play, and I saw a whole fleet of school buses because there were many schools that came to the event, and I could see the smog in the air, and more importantly, I could smell the pollution and smell the diesel fumes. And, I just got really interested in learning more about what was going on with electrification of school buses and larger fleet vehicles in general. So that's what kind of got me down on this road to becoming an electric school bus advocate. Of course, as an attorney, I went to do research and learn more about what was going on in New York and throughout other states and the nation for electrifying school buses. And in learning about New York's history with school buses and environmental law, it just felt it was natural that New York should be leading the transition to electric school buses. So as you can see, the national standards for school buses were set at a conference in 1939, which was brought together by Frank Sire, a professor at Columbia's Teachers College. He convened the conference, and that pretty much set the school bus standards for the nation, and they haven't changed much since then. Before that, school buses were a bunch of different vehicles and in different colors, and school bus color, which we think of as yellow, but is actually called National School Bus Chrome, which I thought was a little interesting. Also, New York City is the location of the first lawsuit to protect the natural environment. Storm King Mountain, many of you may have heard of it, that's in Lower Hudson Valley, but that was the first time citizens were able to get standing to protect the natural environment. This lawsuit even predated the Environmental Protection Act. New York was really the beginning of environmental protection. Also, Transtech, which is in Warwick, New York, developed the first Type A electric school bus. All of their school buses that they were developing, I think they had one in Long Island early on, but the majority of their school buses were going to California. And I thought this was a little absurd that we were making electric school buses in New York, but none of them were deployed. And also, New York State is the largest user of school buses. As you can see in purple, over 44,000 school buses are on the roads in New York, which is about 1 in 10 school buses in the nation. And accounts for about 1 in 11 school buses in the world are operating in New York State. And New York City alone has about 15 to 16,000 school buses. Just New York City alone would be a top 10 state for the number of school buses in operation. So it's very important that New York transitions to electric school buses. And then, of course, as you know, and there's an environmental justice aspects and environmental health aspects for transitioning to electric school buses. As I stated before, pollution from the transportation sector accounts for about 30 to 40% of the air quality, the poor air quality that is experienced throughout the nation. And studies have shown that about 200,000 premature deaths per year are linked to poor air quality. And we recently saw with COVID-19 that mortality was increased in areas with poor air quality. So it's not only the direct effects of poor air quality, but it affects your health outcomes from other diseases, and not just the direct impact of poor air quality, which leads to many diseases that shorten your life and reduce quality of life. In New York City, asthma is the #1 cause of school absenteeism, and studies have shown that as many as 1 in 4 kids in Harlem and also areas of the Bronx have some form of lung degradation, which is very severe and impacts many, many kids, and especially in the summer, as the sunlight interacts with the air pollution, it creates low-level ozone, which will trigger asthmatic attacks. So if we talk a little bit more about the health impacts from diesel school buses, particularly, unfortunately, the studies on the effects of diesel pollution are not that great. And the studies are kind of wide-ranging, but they do all have the same conclusion that diesel pollution is bad for everyone that comes in contact with it, especially young kids who are riding these school buses. The US EPA shows that they have no safe level of exposure for children to diesel exhaust, which is pretty telling. But you'll find out that on the school buses, air pollution is about 10 times more concentrated than being off the school bus or riding in a car behind the school bus. And this was found out as early as 2001 by an NRDC study, which is No Breathing in the Aisles. And you can find these studies on my website. And then there was a follow-up study in 2015, Adopting Clean Fuels and Technologies on School Buses, done by the University of Michigan. And this showed that it affected the health and the development of children's lungs and other organs. And the study also showed that there was a appreciable increase in lung capacity for children after these school buses were put on cleaner fuels like low sulfur fuel, diesel. And then in 2019, a study out of Georgia State University showed that school bus emissions and student health and academic performance showed a correlation between test performance and riding on older, dirtier school buses versus kids who rode on cleaner school buses. There was as much as a 10% increase in their grades, which is very significant. So some of the participation that I've done, my action with the New York City League of Conservation Voters and NYPIRG, we tried to get some of the Dieselgate funding apportioned to school buses, and we're quite victorious. We provided a petition of about 50,000 signatures to Governor Cuomo that ended up getting 52 million for transit and school buses of the approximate 127 million from the VW Dieselgate scandal funding that New York State received. So that was a significant amount of money that's gone towards school bus that can be used for getting cleaner school buses. And also I worked on an electric school bus bill in New York City Council. In 2017, it was introduced by Daniel Drum. This bill has been fairly successful. In 2018, we held the committee meeting. It now has a supermajority of support. However, the bill is still sitting in committee in 2021, which is kind of disappointing. I hope that it'll pass by this school year. If not, then we'll have to get it reintroduced because this is the last year of this session and there'll be newly elected city council members starting in next year. And then I also worked with Representative City Councilman Espinal, who's standing to my left in this picture. And he used some of his discretionary funds to start a electric school bus pilot program, which unfortunately was delayed from the DOE, but they did get started on this Earth Day. They started with the first school bus, and they expect to have 5 on the road by this school year. The mayor also bought out a failing school bus company during COVID. So the city now owns about 1,000 school buses, which they plan to transition to electric by 2030. So hopefully that will continue, and we'll fight to get this electric school bus bill passed to get the rest of the contractors, which are about 10,000 school buses that the New York City DOE contracts every year to transport New York City kids. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you don't get too discouraged. It's definitely going to be a long road, but it's a fight that's well worth the effort. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach me by email or call me. And you can also visit our website for some of the materials that I talked about. We have a lot of papers on studies done with air pollution and electric school buses. And we also have a bunch of articles that talk about the deployment of electric school buses around the country.